Hi everyone, I'm Joanna Penn from thecreativepenn.com, and today I'm back with Helen Sedwick. Hi Helen, how are you?
I'm great, Joanne. How are you?
I'm good. So just a little introduction if people don't know Helen. Helen is a California attorney with 30 years experience representing a diverse range of businesses and entrepreneurs. She writes historical fiction and is well known in the indie author world for the Self-Publisher's Legal Handbook, which I seriously recommend several times a week. And she's also recently co-written How Authors Sell Publishing Rights with Orna Ross on the podcast a while back, and now Helen has released a new course, Publishing Business in a Box, which we're going to talk about today. Wow, Helen, you've been seriously busy. You have.
I must watch the yes word. You know, people say, "Do you want to work on something together?" And I go, "Yes." And but I'm very proud of both projects. The one with Orna Ross, which will help authors think beyond the book and think beyond their own boundaries and languages. Something you're very pro and very encourage writers to think that now that you've got this book, what more can you do with it? And Orna's work at that project with her really focuses on all those other opportunities. And then with Joel Freelander, I did Publishing Business in the Box, which really helps people with the nitty-gritty of setting up your writing and self-publishing and freelancing as a business. So, with screenshots and forms, and to just make it as less intimidating as possible.
Great. So we'll get into the details in that in a minute. But I did want to ask you, because you actually came on the podcast 2 years ago, have you seen, when you put out the legal handbook, have you seen a kind of maturation in the indie space that has led you into these more detailed courses and books?
Yes, I have. I would say there's still a pipeline. And so there are people still coming into the pipeline at the beginning who are making the same mistakes that we all made a few years ago. But they're also, and so there's still a lot to do for you and I and other people who are out there advising people to help them avoid some of these mistakes, especially the expensive ones. But there are more and more people who are further down in the pipeline. They're on their third, fourth, fifth book. They've learned some things. They've had some successes. They're starting to think long-term planning. So there are much more sophisticated questions. That's where the book with Orna Ross really comes in. It's, okay, I've written my books. I've learned the basics of how to get them into the market. Now how do I sell more books? So, and what are the legal issues in going into different countries, setting up a business? So yes, I'm getting a wider range of questions.
Absolutely. Now we're going to get into the details around the business side. Do you need to give any kind of legal disclaimer?
Oh yes, I am an attorney licensed in California only. So what I'm giving today is general legal information, not advice. And that it should be a stepping stone for people to help identify when they actually need to get an attorney or an accountant or some other advisor who will look at their specific situation. So all I'm talking about today is very general information, but which should be still very helpful to get people started.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so let's get into details. So most authors just write books and they think about just writing it. But when does that actually transition into a business, and what does a business even mean?
Some people come to self-publishing already with the business mindset. They see that this is an opportunity. They already have some entrepreneurial experience and they approach it. But I'd say most writers end up starting to think about writing and self-publishing as a business after they've lost some money. It's not the successful writers who are successful right off the bat are usually so busy that they're the last people to get around to setting up their business correctly. But somebody who's kind of said, oh, well, I let my expenses get way ahead of my income. I kind of came into this with the wrong caution or the wrong an analytical point of view, I want to do a better job next time, or I want to pick up the pieces and put them in a better order. So what people find is, and is it, why should they set up a business, or why should they think of it as a business? Well, first of all, it doesn't have to be intimidating. A business doesn't have to be a corporation, or we have a limited liability company here. In different countries, they have different names. You don't have to set it up as an entity. What it is more that you have to think of this as being a separate revenue generating and revenue taking enterprise. It's separate from your personal life. And so it's separate records, separate bank accounts, preferably, just that you treat it separately. And then once you have this information set up separately, it's much easier to understand and analyze that information. So that's what being a business is. It's really segregating this information so that you can learn from it and grow it.
And I mean, you talked about expenses there, and I mean, I don't think I know any author who made money straight away. I mean, in the indie world, because of course you generally have to pay out first for editors and cover design and things. But is the business mindset actually about something where you consider you will make a profit at some point? So, for example, my dad self-publishing one book, he's not necessarily going to even think of that as more than a hobby. Do you have to be considering that you will at some point make a profit in order to keep track of all the losses as well?
Well, you are going to be in a business whether or not you hope to make a profit. Because if you're going to be making a product, and a book is a product, and you're going to be selling it on your website or at readings, or maybe only through Amazon and Barnes and Noble, you are in business. The nice thing is that our tax codes encourage people to start businesses, but you have to think of it as a business. And if you set up and operate as a business, which I give some more details in Publishing Business in a Box, it'll be much easier for you to convince your tax authorities that you are a business. And the benefit there is, if you have losses that are greater than your income from your business, then you can take those losses and deduct them from your other income. But most writers have another source of income. We have day jobs. I do. And since I run my self-publishing as a business, it's the first few years of my self-publishing, I definitely had losses, and I was able to take those losses and deduct them from my day job income. But you can really only do that if you are operating as a business. And part of that is that you have some realistic expectation of making a profit. If you're going into this and you're not expecting to make a profit, then you won't be able to take advantage of those tax breaks. But that's fine. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. I think it's still, writing has a lot of value, but you're still going to need to learn some business basics, because you are selling something and you're going to have to collect sales tax, and you may have to deal with that if you're quite successful in Europe. So there's still some business basics, even if you never hope to make a profit.
And then again, just really back at the beginning, the people who are listening who are still just writing their first book, like they haven't even published a book yet, I would say, like from my personal experience, I would say to not go into this until you are at the point of publishing, at least, because the actual writing of a first book can often take a long time, or some people never finish that book. So are we really talking about people who are publishing or have more than one book?
Yes. If you're still in the writing phase, and maybe you're sending short stories out to anthologies and getting $50 or free copies, you're not really in business yet as far as the taxing authorities are concerned. I would still keep track of those expenses separately. They might be useful as a deduction, depending on your situation. But you're not really in business until you are launching your self-publishing process. It could be you've hired editors, designers, you've crossed that line that you're now going to be creating a product that you're going to sell. As opposed, and it's a mindset because it's your baby when you're writing the book, and now you're going to try to launch it into the world, and that's the moment of change.
And then you mentioned the deductions are one of the benefits, I guess, of taking your writing seriously as a business. What are and you briefly touched on mindset, but I think mindset's a big deal. So what are the kind of mindset benefits of treating it like a business?
I think that the writers who treat it as a business are better able to push through the discouraging parts of the process. I think if you see this as not as about you as much as personal, you see it as a business, and this is something you're going to try to sell, and you think, how can I sell it? How can I sell it better? It can be quite discouraging, but I think if you've separated yourself personally from it to make a business, you're going to be better off. If you're treating it as a business, you're going to have a better feel for what expenses were worth incurring and what were not. And if you're keeping track of your sales and your expenses, you're going to see what marketing worked and what didn't. And I think also it becomes quite satisfying as a whole new challenge, separate from writing. You see the business part is a continually learning process, just like writing is. And so again, I think it helps with the perseverance that sometimes we all need as writers or as any small business person.
Okay. And then what are some of the difficulties of doing this as a business, or some of the things you have to do if you treat it that way?
Oh, none of us like to do things like tax forms. The drawback is it does take some time. If you're somewhat disciplined about it, and you can compress that time quite a bit. Actually, what people can use the business part as great procrastination from writing because it feels more concrete. The drawback is it does complicate your life a little bit, and but with discipline it can. And what I try to do in publishing Business in the Box is give people the tools to make this as easy as possible. Not to make it so that you get to tax time and you've got this box full of chaos that you're trying to sort through. That's really unpleasant. I've been there. I've done that. So the problem is if you're running a business and you're not kind of keeping track of things, you're going to have that box of a mess, and that's the real drawback. So we're talking there like a box of receipts, I guess. So what are the record keeping things that people have to do with a business? There are two basic categories of record keeping. One is contracts. If you hire a designer, if you buy images online, you want to keep those contracts for as long as your book is available for sale. So people think 3 years. No, anything like it's a contract or a license, you want to keep forever, because you don't want your book to suddenly become quite popular, and 5 years from now, someone say, "Oh, you can't use that cover I designed for you anymore." So you want keep those records. The other records are financial records, and we keep those primarily for tax reasons. I'm convinced that more people get in trouble with tax authorities because they lose receipts than that they're trying to cook the books. I don't know whether you use the expression "cook the books" in Britain. So you should keep your financial records at least 3 years. I usually say at least 5. Put them in a box, put them somewhere. Don't do what I did, which is I put them in my garage and the mice got to them. Don't do that. Now I have everything in plastic boxes. And just keep them, put them aside so you don't have to look at them. And then every once in a while, just send them off to the shredder.
Yeah. So, and I just have one folder per month, like plastic folder. I have one plastic folder per month, and I put all the paper in there. And then actually nowadays, I'm not even printing my Amazon receipts or my PayPal stuff, because that all comes by email. And because, you know, now it's much easier to search your email than it is to search a whole load of paper. I know some people use Evernote. What do you think about that kind of digital record keeping where you can find things by search?
I think it's wonderful. I actually believe in doing both.
Yeah.
That you should have, if you're now in business, you should have backup. And it can be your email box that's out in the cloud. It could be a Dropbox or some other Evernote, some program that keeps a record of your transactions for all kinds of reasons. And it is much faster to find everything. I'm also an old school person. I like to see things in print. So for me, at tax time, it's easier for me to take a stack of receipts that are printed and add them up, as opposed to searching through my email and then having to print them out. So part of being in business is keeping these records, but I think personally both printed and online.
Yeah, I think there's some millennials listening who are like, what? Printing thing?
I know it's probably not ecologically hard, but I'm not a millennial. My children are. The other thing is, for bookkeeping, there are many online programs. You can put a program on your computer like QuickBooks, but there are also many online programs. They're often reviewed regularly. Most programs will have much more capacity than you need. You're not doing payroll and things like that. But it's pretty easy and almost kind of fun to use these online programs to keep track of your income and expenses. And they do all these little graphs and pie charts for you. So you can do a simple handwritten technique, or you can use an online program which automatically does a lot of computations for you.
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned fun there, because I actually really enjoy doing my QuickBooks, and there is a QuickBooks Online, which is software as a service, and it integrates with your bank account. And what's actually interesting is I'm far more aware of my financial status than I am of my book sales status. So these are actually the tax authorities and the records that you need for your financial accounts. You don't actually need book sales numbers, do you? Those are not numbers that people want. They actually want physical money as opposed to sales volume as such.
They only care about dollars and cents, yes, or pounds and cents. They don't care about your book rankings. They care about, it's called, you're a cash basis taxpayer, what cash came in and what cash came out.
Yeah, and it's funny because I've been thinking about this and Dean Wesley Smith talks about this, who's a great indie, is that, you know, we should be more aware of our financial status, you know, than the fact, you know, if you've sold 1 million books for free, you know, sold in inverted commas, or you've sold them at a 30%, 35% royalty, the money is actually more important than the number of books sold. Do you think authors sometimes have this the wrong way round?
I think, well, it's part of the business transition.
Yeah.
I think there's always a lag. There's a lag between when your book sells and when you get the cash into your checking account. And so looking at book sales is a more immediately satisfying experience. But I can tell you getting cash into your account is also a satisfying experience. Yes, I think when you make the transition to thinking of it as a business and you have multiple sources of income, something you've talked about quite a bit, then that's the quickest way. Looking at your bank accounts is the quickest way to see how all those multiple sources are actually paying off to the bottom line. Because if you look at, Audible, and you look at Amazon, you look at Ingram Spark, and you look at BabbleCube, you're getting tiny pieces. And that, I think, would drive you a little bit crazy if you were trying to keep on a spreadsheet all of that information. Some people will do that, but if you want the the fast bottom line, you look at your bank accounts.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so one of the biggest questions I get is around names. So what are the difference between the real name, the pen name, the publisher name, the imprint, the company name? Can you go through what these different names are or can be?
Okay, there are two big categories. One is who is the author, that name, and who is the publisher. And as an author, you could write under your own name or a variety of your own name, your initials, your middle name. That would be the author name. You can also, as an author, write under a pen name. That's completely legal. It's best to choose a pen name nobody else is using, just because marketing-wise it's going to be terribly confusing. And there are probably other legal hazards as well. And a pen name, you can even be quite secretive as to what your real identity is. I've written some about that. It's quite a chore to try to keep your true identity secret. Many writers don't bother. They treat their pen name like a trade name. These are J.K. Rowling's books, or in your books you have different names. You use different varieties of your names. Now your imprint or company name is what we call in the US a DBA, a doing business as name. Most of our companies are not in this country, millions of them are not corporations. They're just an individual or group of individuals who decide to operate under a business name. Your florist, your grocery, everything. And you adopt that. There's a process in the UK to adopt a name, in the United States to adopt a name, and it merely becomes the name of your publisher, the company that takes your book from manuscript to a printed book and then distributes it. I recommend that people have a business name. This is the business that publishes their books and markets their books. It helps people think of the business as something separate from themselves.
So, and then the name of, say, the bank account on the account is, if they're operating as a DBA, it might be their own personal name?
Usually it's your personal name, DBA, your business name. Like for my books, I use 10-gallon press. So it's my bank account and my credit cards for my business say Helen Sedwick, 10-gallon press, or DBA 10-gallon press. At least in the US, I don't know how it is in the UK, if you are operating as a sole proprietorship, in the UK it's called a sole trader, you are the bank account holder, but they do put your business name on the account so that if you get checks made out to your business name, you can deposit it into those accounts.
And then I'm a limited company, or I have a limited company, the Creative Penn Limited. So that is a step up. That's like a corporation, right? An LLC in the US. So there are different levels of what people might want to do. But basically what you're saying is when they're starting out, it can be quite simple.
I recommend people keep it simple. You can form a corporation or a limited company or a limited liability company. But when you're starting out, it's an unnecessary expense and complication. It costs at least several $100s to keep it a year, to keep an entity alive. It does make sense when you're making tens of thousands of dollars of income a year. When you get to that point, it's time to sit down with an accountant and set things up. But at the beginning, writers do not need to do it. If you go to a cocktail party and someone says, oh, you must set up a corporation, they don't know what they're talking about. It's cocktail party talk.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very good point. No, that's cool. And the other question I get is, what name should copyright be under?
It may be under your author name or your pen name or both in the US. And I think in Britain, a lot of people in Europe, people outside the US, still register their copyright with the US Copyright Office because it creates a record of what they owned when. It's a nice thing to have. So when you fill out, it's an online form to register with the US Copyright Office, and they have a line that says author name, and then they have a line that says pen name, and then you can choose whether to list the copyright under both or just one of those.
Okay, cool. Because I think, yeah, some people do get very confused about that. If people get things in inverted commas wrong, or they change things over time. So say they wrote an original book and didn't have a company, or maybe they're 3 books in and they've just done everything under their own name and now they want to do a DBA. Do they go back and change the other 3, or do they just kind of change things going forward?
If you're talking about the copyright registration, I don't see.
Oh no, just everything, kind of everything.
Oh, in fact, most people, I think, get started and they finally get down to the bank and set up their accounts like a year later, because they're just not, they're thinking of it as like, oh, this is my book, I'm going to get it out. And they're not yet thinking of it as a business until they, probably the first time they do their taxes. And then they realize there's got to be a better way. So I think you just start fresh. So I'm not quite sure. There's nothing actually wrong with doing it in your own name. You're just going to be transitioning your accounts. You're going to set up new PayPal accounts, and you're going to set up new bank accounts, and then you're going to contact CreateSpace and Ingram Spark, and you're going to give them now your publisher name and your new bank. You're going to direct payments to your new bank account. So you just basically spend an afternoon moving everything over. But I wouldn't call it a mistake. It's just your business is evolving.
Yeah, and we're all evolving, that's for sure. Yeah. So another question I get is really interesting, especially from people who are just writing their first book, is how do I finance my business? And which I always find really odd, because I had a day job and I just paid for it out of my earnings and my savings and all that. But you have some other options in the book. So what are your thoughts on financing for this new business?
Well, first of all, beg, borrow as much as you can in terms of you're going to be wanting to hire services. And I think first you have to set priority on what you can afford. I always recommend the first thing that authors spend money on is good editorial help. The number one problem I see in self-published books is that they're published too soon. They should have gone through another round or 2 of developmental editing, line editing, copy editing, all of the above. And this book that has great potential would have just achieved more of that potential. So first, set priority on what your expenses are, and then simple things like when it's birthday or holiday, say, I don't need another scarf. What I need is a contribution to my publishing fund. And people actually will be very excited to help you that way. On a more structured basis, there are grants. There are many places that give grants or scholarships to writers. You can look into those. There are lists, like Poets and Writers magazine has a list of places where you can apply for grants. And then there's crowdfunding, which there are a number of sites where authors can put their work up and try to pitch it and sell it and get contributions to the cost of production. Crowdfunding is a big project. The most successful crowdfunders already have a platform, already have a following, have a great story to tell, and they're out there doing it. Just simply posting something up on crowdfunding sites probably is not going to get you more than asking your friends and relatives directly to do it. And you end up paying the site a small percentage for them acting as the conduit. So those are really my suggestions. And then in terms of a day job income, going back to the business concept and the tax concept, start right off by, if you have a separate account, take the money from your personal account, invest it into your business account, and run all your expenses out of that business account right from the start. Many people don't do this, but if you do it, you'll be life will be much simpler.
Hmm.
So you're investing from your own and put all that into a separate account so that you keep the income and expenses separate from the beginning. Many people hearing this will say, oops, I didn't do it. All right, start tomorrow.
Yeah, so that's cool. And just that you mentioned, obviously, editors, which I agree with, the editor, especially for fiction, I think is so important for learning how to write. But what are some of the things people might need to look out for in a contract, whether it's a editor, cover designer, publishing platform? I mean, you go into a lot of detail on this, but what are some of the, big red flags that you might point out?
Well, people should understand that a contract is really a roadmap. And so you want to look at it as a roadmap and see whether it takes you from where you are to where you want to go. And particularly, I'm going to talk about freelance contracts. If you really are working with one individual, there's a lot of value in talking through the contract with that individual. Like a designer or editor probably is going to send you their form of contract, or it's going to be on their website. Walk through it and talk about it, because if you do a good job talking about a contract before you sign it, then chances are you'll never have to look at it again. Mm-hmm. Where people get in trouble is where they don't look at the contract and everyone comes in with a different set of assumptions. And then, surprise, surprise, there's a disagreement later on because everyone was thinking something different. And so the process of talking about a contract is the most valuable part of a contract. Now, if you're not working with a one-on-one with a freelancer and you're going with a big company, I get very nervous about that. Some of these big companies have terrible contracts, and if you're a writer, you need to spend a little bit of time understanding about licenses and the grants of licenses. And on my website and some blog posts I've written in Self-Publishers Legal Handbook, I actually take contracts, and then the back of the book, I have a short contract phrase, and then I have an explanation as to what it means. Your writers are in the word business. They need to understand these words because they've worked so hard on their creation, they don't want to give them away.
And I think, as you're saying, I mean, your book, the Legal Handbook, the Self-Publishers Legal Handbook, and then there are some other ones, some other books about intellectual property and copyright and things. And because it's expensive to hire an attorney, right? And most writers are not going to do that unless they really have to. So I would advise people as well, just spend a little bit of money on these books and a bit of time just coming to grips with the major stuff, and then you hire an attorney if it's some like big deal, right? So for example, if I was offered a film contract, I would definitely want to take that through an IP attorney, intellectual property lawyer, because I just wouldn't even want to take a risk on that. But clearly, KDP's terms and conditions, we can't do anything about that.
We can't, but they're really. In terms of doing a rights grab, the CreateSpace, Ingram Spark, and KDP contracts are not bad. They are completely appropriate. You are giving them a license, which is permission, merely to take your book and sell it through their channel. Mm-hmm. And you can terminate it at any time. It's what's called non-exclusive, so you don't have to use them exclusively unless you're in KDP Select, which is, again, the writer's choice. There are some other companies, some of them call themselves small publishers, although the author has to pay to get their book put together, and they have contracts where they take exclusive rights to your work for the life of the contract in all languages and all formats. And that's outrageous. That's outrageous. And I've written about this where I give examples, because it's hard to talk about this conceptually. You really have to see, these are good words, these are bad words. And I've written quite a bit of samples, and I have some on my website. In fact, I'm probably thinking about this, do another handout that people can download to just give them examples of the hot words to look for. And then if you see them, chances are if there are very author unfavorable provisions in that part of the contract, then the rest of the contract is terrible as well. You don't need to read it. And I say to people, don't start at the beginning of the contract. Just look at the license granting clause, because if that's fair, then you can look at the rest of the contract. If that's unfair, toss it out. Don't go any further.
No, fascinating. Okay, last question. I get a lot of emails from authors writing memoirs or non-fiction, sometimes even fiction, who worry about getting sued if they're writing things that might offend someone. So what's your advice around that?
Well, I usually encourage people to write the book and then think about there's the writing of the book and then the publishing of the book. The problem comes in the publishing. But for many writers, the process of writing the book is very valuable. And they often find truths or understandings that actually makes things less offensive in the long run, because even the person who's the target, as well say, may say, well, I don't like it, but it's fair, or that's her point of view. So what people should realize, if you're merely mentioning someone's name, that's not a problem. Saying something nice or neutral about a person, that's not a problem. What's a problem is if you say something that could be very damaging to that person's reputation, professional or personal reputation, or horribly embarrassing or quite damaging to their ability to get a job. Then you need to be much more thoughtful as to what the legal implications are, because you can get in trouble if the information is false about an identifiable person, means identifiable to third parties, not the person themselves, or if the information is very private about an identifiable person and damaging. If it's that kind of information, then consider how important is it to your story. It may be central to your story, so you have to do it. It could be that maybe you just want to take a dig at this person who made your life difficult at some point, and it's not that important to your story. And maybe you could tone it down or make the person less identifiable. And if it really is a problem, then consult with an attorney. I can say that most fiction authors, it's very rare that fiction authors are sued, because in fiction you have a lot more liberty to hide who this person really is. In memoir and nonfiction, there you just have to be sensitive to these issues and know when you need to ask for help. And when we were talking earlier, there are many organizations of attorneys for the arts where you can often get free or very low cost help. It's better if you take it as far as you can yourself, so that by the time you get to an attorney, you can be the most efficient that you can, and you'll actually be better able to understand the advice. But you don't have to go it alone. There are a lot of attorneys who are willing to give artists free consultations, maybe half an hour or 45 minutes, because they just want to kind of not spend too much time on something. But there's no reason for an author to think that they're on their own. And if an author's really writing a high-risk book, there are also some insurance options. Fantastic. But again, if you're at that point, it's time to get a little more sophisticated in terms of the help that you're going to get.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Okay, so you've given us loads of information, but there's so much more in your publishing business in a box. So just give some more details about what that includes.
Great. I walk people through the process of setting up their business, whether it's an incorporation or not, how to choose a name, how to figure out whether the business name has been taken, how to do searches. Even if you're a very small business, certain governmental levels do want to know you're in business. So there are a few licenses you need to get. So I give examples, and then I give sample forms for hiring an editor, releases. If you're writing someone's story, you want to release, some tax guidelines, sales tax. It is focused on US because I am a US attorney and that's what I do. And I give lots of screenshots. I give sample forms. Artistic types, well, just not, a lot of people are very intimidated by the process. My goal really was to give as many forms and as many nitty-gritty examples as possible, so that people could do this on their own. Take the mystery and intimidation out of it. So I think it's about 15 forms, because I've had requests to add additional forms to the package. For instance, people who have self-published wanted to start helping other people self-publish. So I've created a form contract for people to work through for that circumstance. And there's a webinar on Joel Freelander's book template site, which I'm sure you'll talk about, which will also just give some really nitty-gritty information.
No, fantastic. So where can people find the Publishing Business in a Box and your website and all you do online?
My website is helensedwick.com, Sedwick. Many people want to say Helen Sedwick. That's not me. There's actually a Scottish writer, Helen Sedwick. I've gotten her emails. I'm sure she's gotten mine. And then Joel Freelander has a site called Book Templates, and I think he has a new name, which I'm blanking on here. But also on my website under resources, there's a direct link to where you can find Publishing Business in the Box. On my resources page, I also have 2 other downloads that can help people. One thing we didn't talk about is people want to use lyrics, or they want to use images, and they want to know, how do they do that? And I have some downloads that just give people, again, real how-to information about those 2 tasks.
Fantastic. As ever, you're so helpful. So thank you so much for your time, Helen. That was great.
Thank you. I'm glad to help.